Disney Lorcana and back-to-back weeks has really come out swinging with Into the Inklands. Another meta report today focusing on some of the brand new decks that came out. We can talk about it because guess what? Last week there was no Sapphire, but this week Sapphire came out swinging. A lot of success. Runner-up in a big event. Won another small 1K over in Minnesota. A lot of good things. Cinderella. Yep. I'm going to eat some crud on that one, but Cinderella came out real good. She looked real insane and almost single-handedly won in a 178-player event. It's pretty good, guys. Lots to talk about on today's meta report. Let's break into the best decks of Week 2 in Disney Lorcana. Top 8 decks, Week 2, into the Inklands metagame. Yes, I know, Ruby Amethyst is towering again. I know it's getting a little upsetting to watch this, but I think we're still early. I still think there's a lot of adaptation to the metagame. I do think that the Emerald Steel here and the Amethyst Steel are still very much kind of in a building phase of trying to figure out the best ways to answer the metagame. I also think there's a really awkward chance that both of these decks in particular might not have the greatest matchup into Ruby Amethyst. And because of that, it's causing some kinks in decision making. Ruby Amethyst is still seemingly really, really powerful on the play. And because of that, you know, when you're on the play, and if you're putting on a die roll, and then you have maybe still the best odds to win on the draw, as opposed to like all these other decks aren't crazy good going second. They definitely lose a fair amount of points, where Ruby Amethyst still feels like it can squeak towards a 45 or 50% win rate on the draw, which I think is a big deal. So Ruby Amethyst comes out on top with 19, Emerald Steel with 8, Amethyst Steel with 6, Emerald Amethyst with 4, Sapphire Steel gets on the board this week with 3, Amber Steel has 3 and picked up a gigantic win in the Pixelborn tournament. Amethyst Sapphire, that's right, Amethyst Sapphire, a deck that had made 0 top 8s in the Rise of Floodborn metagame, picks up 2 individual top cuts this weekend. 1 Ruby Amber, 1 Ruby Steel, and 1 Amber Amethyst. So definitely some new decks to, you know, be on the watch for, which is great. We're going to look at a couple of these in this video. And of course, as always, guys, you know, I can't cover every single deck list in these videos, but I always put links to the tournaments that I found them at, and, you know, give a little love to those, of course, those websites that are tracking that information. Shout out to inkdex.com. And wherever else I can find the information. A lot of time, random group of Facebook. Sometimes it's a player at the event that emails us the data. So if you're ever looking to get that data featured in this report, definitely just email me, hit me up on social media, Discord, wherever you know where you can find me. That's how you can definitely get on the meta report. But all in all, I think this is kind of where I expect this metagame to be right now. There's nothing too crazy about it. It's really cool to see Amethyst Sapphire kind of make a little bit of a splash. We're definitely going to be looking at one of those decks in today's video. And Ruby Amethyst, guys, is just good. You know, like it's still good. It's still powerful. It's still leaning towards really, really powerful cards and powerful plays. And even though we have Ursula's and Bare Necessities and things like that, Be Prepared still a really, really good card. And we're finding new ways. In some ways, it's old ways. We're going back to an old card that was successful in Rise of the Floodborn to really shore up some of the matchups that we were worried about. So let's discuss it. Let's start talking about Ruby Amethyst, and then, of course, the rest of the decks as much as we can on today's video. So let's take a look at the Ruby Amethyst deck that finished 3rd place in the Pack 3rd Chapter event held this weekend, which is about 180 players, which is a phenomenal count for the game. You know, getting that many players and for any tournament is awesome. Seeing it be able to play out 8 rounds of Swiss, cut to a top 16. Jeebus here was he was on the outskirts. He was on a top 16 record. So he was able to go from a top 16 to finish in the top 4, which is great. But some of the cards in here are very notable. Maleficent Monstrous Dragon is a card that has really fallen out of favor. A lot of Ruby Amethyst decks have been cutting it. They're relying on other forms of removal that are cheaper, thinking they're not going to get up to that. And then I will say this much, anyone that was watching games this weekend, there were several turns where Maleficent Dragon looked like the greatest card ever in Disney Lorcana, creating play lines because of Pinocchio and Madame Mim Fox, along with Snake being able to bounce Maleficent back. He's able to like just one shot a lot of problematic locations with that 7 strength. So yeah, this becomes a card that as the game goes later and longer, 9 resources seems like, a lot to invest. But when it comes into play, removes a character that's problematic, and then of course, like just has this stat line that can take out queen's castles and things like that. I think it's really powerful. And then the ability to bounce them back to your hand late, and instead of utilizing the goat package that we've been so familiar with, really utilizing this removal package with Madame Mims and Maleficence is turning into a way to win games along with Pinocchio. Pinocchio talking to Puppet is definitely a card that is coming back into fashion because of Ursula. Ursula Deceiver of All is a card that if you don't answer that character on turn 3 on the draw, in some cases, your opponent might just run away with the game because allowing them to sing 2 songs for free and all of the crazy effects that can get off with it is just so powerful that you really have to respect it. And Pinocchio is definitely playing that role to come in, exert something down so you can attack it with Snake or attack it with Rafiki, whatever ends up happening. Maui's Hook is a great addition. There is really almost nobody playing or committing to item removal right now, and that's for a good, like I think good a good reason. I don't think it's at like crazy important to have answers to this. Some of the decks that are going to become more and more reliant on locations very well may have to start playing like a Benja or something like that to be respectful. But there's also another card that's going to see probably an uptick in play. We're going to talk about in a future deck list here. But all in all, I think Maui's Hook is playing a huge role, giving cards evasive, pumping up your characters for bigger trades and better trades, really just putting in a lot of work. At the end of the day here, only having 2 Jim Hawkins is probably, I think a really safe play. I really enjoy what Jim Hawkins can do, but I don't think we should ever be on the plan of saying we need to do it. And if we can just make him work when he does and get all the value out of a Queen's Castle, I think that's wonderful. But I will say this much: I've seen plenty of decks this weekend that were very similar, that did play the RLS legacies, that did play more gems, and they really did pressure the game state very well and really force opponents into just like losing to passive lore from locations. So I think there's definitely a world where this is a decision made by Jeebus and how he wanted to play the deck. But I really don't think that this is the only direction this deck can be played. I think you can definitely fit it to your style and kind of just really mold it to where you want it to be. And that's really the power of Ruby Amethyst has always had, is this ability to where you can consistently build this deck with like a 40 card core, and then the last 20 cards can kind of just roll into the ones that you enjoy the most. The last notable thing here is no Prince Eric. Prince Eric is a card that a lot of people are really hype about. A lot of people are very much on the combinations with Teeth and Ambitions and all these crazy things. And it's really interesting to see here, like we're just not playing it. We didn't want to do it, which is great. We have Madame Mims, or I'm sorry, we have Madame Medusas, Be Prepared, Maleficence, the Pinocchio, the Teeth and Ambitions, and of course the Madame Mim Foxes, all acting as sweet removal. Maui's Hook turns everything into a potential removal character, which is great. And then Crab really is, again, I said this last week, but Merlin Crab might very well be a 3 or 4 of in every Amethyst deck moving forward, just because his ability is so impactful and it's really hard to walk away from it. Emerald Steel was the second most successful deck on this weekend, having 8 top 8s. But this one, played by our good friend Zach Bivens, won a 1K event down in North Carolina, which is sweet. This deck is pretty great. It's definitely being well positioned in the metagame. It has several wins in 1Ks now. There were a good amount of these. Like I said, 8. I think there were 3 of these in the top 16 of the giant Pixelborn tournament, along with 2 of them finishing in top 8. So this is definitely a deck that people have moved into, really enjoy playing the play style of it. And I think that that's really notable. This is a little bit different than the version we saw last week. We actually have Beast Relentless in this deck, but we do not have the Bayou. We do not have the Sheriff of Nottingham. So we're not really looking to combo out with this. But what I really enjoy about that in particular is actually like the mind game that you can play with your opponent. Even if you just ink a Beast Relentless early, it now makes your opponent think like, oh, maybe this is the combo version. So now I have to play differently, knowing that my opponent could just combo me out in one turn. So when you can kind of play that mind game with your opponent so freely, because I don't think this deck gets hurt at all by playing the Beast Relentless, because it's just a really good card. And there's definitely no saying that you can't gain like maybe 4 or 6 lore with this card in a given turn. However, really what it does to your opponent is going, oh man, like if they're the wheel deck, if they're the OTK deck, I really can't put myself in a position to lose the Beast Relentless. So it might actually make your Beast, Tragic Heroes a little bit better. It might keep your Robin Hoods around for a little bit longer, because in the back of their mind, they might be thinking the entire time, like, man, if I don't answer that Beast Relentless when he plays it, I'm going to lose the game. Let's break down the rest of the deck. For me, the MVP of this deck ends up being Bucky more often than not. I really, really think Bucky is a true player in the metagame, similar to its counterpart in Blue Fairy that we're going to talk about shortly. But Bucky just being able to sit and play, not really worry too much about any interaction for the most part for several turns, gives you the ability to really just nickel and dime your opponent's hand. I love the interactions with Kit, being able to bounce something back to their hand and then, following up, making them discard with a Floodborn character and things like that. Really just powerful things going on. In this particular list, it looks like we are not on Mother's Knows Best. We're not on Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo. We're playing Strength of a Raging Fire and Let the Storm Rage On, along with Strike a Good Match. This comes in the form of two great, really great ways to remove cards from play with Ursula. And then the Strike a Good Match is like the when in doubt, I'm just gonna draw 4 and sift through and kind of mend out the rest of my games. Regardless of any of these songs, when you're able to sing with Ursula on turn 4, all of these are phenomenal. They're also very, very good. They're also very powerful. And pretty much all of them can act as a way to reset the board or reset your hand. And in some cases, we can do both with a double Let the Storm Rage On. We get 2 cards and maybe take out a character or potentially 2. The 4, and then Along Came Zeus, is a testament to not really wanting to lose the specific cards. And it's also a testament to saying, I need a way to get rid of locations, because if you look at this deck, there's definitely not a great way of dealing with locations outside of Along Came Zeus. We're not playing any of the Rise of the Titans, which is another card we're going to be talking about soon. We're really just committed to low strength characters. Yes, Tinkerbell has 4, but aside from that, everything is sitting around 3 or low. And then the Beast Relentless is definitely not a card you really want to challenge with in terms of removing locations, because you can't actually ready then. So you're very limited on your ways to interact with cards like the Queen's Castle and with cards like McDuck's Manor. So having 4 Long Came Zeus is definitely a way of saying, okay, I need that 5 damage most likely for locations, but when in doubt, it can take out opposing beasts, it can take out Jafars, it can take out Tinkerbells, it does a lot of work outside of it, of course. The good thing about this particular player and Zach Bivens is that he actually started a brand new YouTube channel called Lorcana Castle. So if you're looking for insights about particular deck that he's played in the past, Zach is a really, profound Lorcana player. He's been successful in so many different 1Ks and 2Ks in his area. He's had success in some of the online tournaments as well. So if you want to hear really from the horse's mouth and Zach Bivens and learn even from his perspective, I think it's a good idea to check out Lorcana Castle. I'll put the link in the description below. Shout out to Zach, and hey, man, good luck on your Lorcana journey as a content creator. Speaking of awesome content creators, Zephyr YouTube comes in with a top 8 finish in the Pack Third Chapter Challenge. So this is one of the more interesting decks I have seen. We have seen a lot of decks that are, really all in on the Jafar combo wheel, and we've seen them be successful. We've seen some of them fall on their face. But what I can say for sure is that we have not seen a 60-card deck list that looked like this one at all yet for this deck. And there is so many interesting particular choices being made about it that we have to really cover them all. Before we get to those, the first thing is Blue Fairy. Blue Fairy is absolutely an insane card in this game. It's really living off the same situations that I feel about Morph, where it's a card that you kind of have to answer, but you really can't always do it. And because you can't always do it, the value you gain from it is immeasurable. And any game where we can go turn 1 Robin Hood, turn 2 Blue Fairy, turn 3 Robin Hood, draw a card, play a Grab Your Swords or play a Long Came Zeus, or even in some situations just wheel. is pretty insane that you even had that line of play. But when you follow that line of play up with, I'll play Jafar Dreadnought, draw a card, and now your opponent's just like, great, like, what do I do? Like, we have this 3/6 in play that has the ability to just challenge myself, gain lore. Now we have this Jafar that's threatening a whole new world, gain 7 lore. Like, you put your opponents in some really, really bad positions, and a lot of that starts with Blue Fairy because Blue Fairy is the card that will generate so much value for you through additional card draw that your opponent just doesn't have answers to everything. Like, you just end up drawing so many cards off this 1/1 evasive character that for the most part you actually gain a fair amount of lore with also from questing, that it's pretty insane how good this card is, and I don't think it's gotten enough flowers yet. Like, everyone should be talking about Blue Fairy. This card's absolutely incredible. Let's talk about some of the really, really fun interactions here. So the first one that I want to talk about is Rise of the Titans. Now, this is a card that I've been very high on since the release. Honestly, since release weekend, I've been all about this card because I felt that even in limited, it was so difficult to interact with locations. From the first time I was able to sit down, play with Into the Inklands, and realize, like, man, dealing 7 is not easy. Dealing 8 is really tough. Dealing 9 is unbelievably hard. So, like, when you look at what Rise of the Titans offers you as an inkable card in your deck and just say, well, I could look at it like, oh, I have to play 3 ink to remove a card, and that really sucks because I can't sing it, yada, yada. But if you look at it like, well, if I just play 3 ink and I deal 9 damage to a McDuck Mansion, that feels insane because nothing else in the game can allow me to do that. Nothing else in the game reads pay 3 on an inkable card and do 9 damage or do 8 damage or do 7 damage. Like, there just isn't another card that can do what it's doing. And the fact that it's inkable means that you can very freely play the card and just ink it when you don't need it. I think Rise of the Titans will very well likely end up being a staple in steel decks moving forward. There's just, they already don't have enough great interactions, and a long game Zeus is wonderful and it is a way to do it, but it still mostly needs help from another card. This is one card, it's inkable, and it just reads banish a chosen location. Oh, and by the way, it also has another part of text on here that we're not even really acknowledging, which is it can also banish an item. So the fact that you add a layer of versatility to where if items come back in favor, if Maui's hook starts to become a problem, or Fishbone Quill starts running around haywire, or even some other item that maybe hasn't gotten a lot of love yet, like a Robin's bow or something like that, I think that Rise of the Titans ends up being a phenomenal card. And at the end of the day, it's inkable, which is so very good. The other key cards here that I think are really interesting to note are the 1 Fire the Cannons and the 1 Baboom. They really are setting up for what I'd like to think is mostly leftover damage. Grab your swords is great, but it normally leaves stuff sitting around. So for 1 more or 2 more resources, we can take it out. Tinkerbell is phenomenal, but sometimes you really need the extra damage to turn it back into your favor. Yeah, it makes Tinkerbell more expensive, but hey, if you have the extra resources late in the game, because this deck's not always going to win on turn 5, even though it can, it's not always going to win on turn 5. It really ends up being just like very valuable wheel cards. This deck loves to wheel, with a character by singing it, but there's a very often amount of times where just leftover damage is on the table. And for 1 resource on a Fire the Cannons or 2 resources on a Baboom, you gotta just pick off characters when your opponent's least expecting it. And later in the game, when you just can drop awkward curves where you're just like, hey, I'll just drop my beast, and then I'll pick off your dude that had random damage laying around from, a Jafar Dreadnought or a Rabbit or something like that. Like, it really does just enable some more stuff. And then, of course, not to mention, Baboom does hit locations, so there is that to note as well. The craziest thing about this deck, and I think it's like a testament to the deck builder and the work that Zephyr put into this particular list, no foxes, no snakes, no goats. We're not playing any of those. In Rise of the Floodborn, everything with Amethyst was about those cards along with Rabbit, which we're still playing Rabbit because, hey, Rabbit's insane. But the fact that we're able to build an Amethyst deck, take it to a top 8 of a 180-player event without those cards is really just showing growth in Disney Lorcana, and it's a true testament to the design of Into the Inklands if we got so many new cards and we were able to build an Amethyst deck that wasn't relying on those cards. And I think that's the best part. If you haven't checked out Zephyr YouTube, definitely check him out. He's awesome. Emerald Amethyst is kind of the talk of the town recently, being the default Fact 2 aggro deck in the format. This deck really does have the ability to pressure opponents early and really, maintain board control throughout the game with kits. Kit Cloud Kicker, Mother Knows Best, Ursula. We talked about this deck a bunch last week because it won one of the first events over across the pond. And, this week it had less of a showing. It wasn't as much success, but we still had 4 of these in top 8. So it still had its moments to shine. It's still doing mostly all the same things. There wasn't a crazy evolution of the style of this deck this week, which I do expect that as time goes on, if we have to really start looking at changing our play lines and realizing that maybe this deck is tough into the steel matchups, you're going to have to make some core changes to make this deck more reliable and more consistent. And especially if, Rise of the Titans becomes more favorable, then the Queen's Castle doesn't look as enticing. The card is absolutely remarkably incredible. But if you have to pay 4 and then they just pay 3 and they just get rid of it and you don't get lore or get the draw card from it and you spend extra resources like moving cards there, it really feels like too big of a time walk for you in most cases. Whereas before, without that card, the card was like super over the top good because it was really trying to make opponents find the craziest amounts of way to answer it. But right now, the Queen's Castle ends up potentially being a liability for this deck, which is kind of scary to say. No other really particular standouts from this list. It's starting to look like this is kind of the generic stock version of it. I'm still not comfortable saying that the Sorcerer's Spellbook is good. I'd much rather just play another card, preferably one that's inkable. I'm not crazy about that. I would 100% rather have a third Queen's Castle than have that Spellbook at all. And I think other than that, the genies are great. What they do, being a 6 cost uninkable, it's actually kind of difficult sometimes when you get to it if you can't Ursula. If your Ursula lives and you can draw 4 cards with friends on the other side, then you have all the resources in the world to get to 6. But I'm really starting to try and find ways to play this deck without the reliant of Ursula on turn 3 surviving, because pretty much everyone that is going to show up to these tournaments and be in competitive mindset, they're not building decks that are going to lose to Ursula. So because of that, you need to adapt your game plan to it a bit and understand that if that's your only way to victory, you're probably in a big problem. So while Ursula is very good and she demands an answer, you have to hope that if they do have the answer, you have a follow-up that is not just as good, but it's good enough to stay in the game. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure you smash that like button for me. If you're new here, we do this every single week. We break down the week's metagame, give you guys as much information as possible that we've been able to find and acquire. Can't do that without, most cases, some weeks, inkdex.com. They're in the description below. Every deck list from every event that I've discussed or talked about, and even more deck lists that I don't have time for, are all in the link below at inkdex.com/tournaments. Definitely check them out if you're looking for more information. And of course, if you are enjoying this, make sure you subscribe. Here every week. We do it every week. Let me know in the comments what you felt about this week's meta report in the overall standings of some of these decks. Are we still upset that Ruby Amethyst is so high? Is some of our decks on the bottom need to come up? Where are we at with the metagame so far? Let me know if you're enjoying the Into the Inklands metagame to this point. Let's get in the rest of the decks. So here we are with Sapphire Steel. This deck was played by Lorcana Twins, another content creator that you can check out. Doesn't make his content as often, but I'm sure he'll find some reasons to get back into it. This is his first place after Swiss at a 5-0 run record at the 2K event at Bunker Gaming in Minnesota. And Steel Wheel is back. What I do really like about this deck, as opposed to the deck that finished second place in the pack event, is, man, I find it so hard to play this deck without Hades. And anyone watching the finals in the most recent event, for the pack, Cinderella short stouted, absolutely crushed, and was able to win a game for 3 consecutive turns, and more than that, of course, over the game itself, where tapping an untapped character was so very powerful, getting rid of Cogsworths, that were just hanging out for the resist, and Cinderella just came in and just took them out without a problem, is insanity. So having a card like Hades in your deck seems so important because otherwise you have no way to answer shorts out it, and you really need one. So finding a way to play Hades and maybe even a couple let it goes, I think is going to be the play moving forward if Cinderella becomes a bigger problem. But all in all, this is kind of a list that I expected this deck to turn into. We talked about it last week how there was no Sapphire Steel decks in top eights. This week we get a couple of them to look at, and this one really does look like the perfect version of it. Adding Mr. Smee over Prince Eric, keeping the Captain Hook line is a really great start against aggro decks. Having the Grandma Tala as a potential race, or way to actually come from behind is really remarkable, and it really does threaten things. Going to Gaston now as a 3-of Gaston who dodges Madame Medusa, which I think is huge, but being able to play like Gaston on turn 4 when you have 6 resources and you hit the curve that you want, and putting a 4/4 with lore, with 3 lore into play that gets to dig you further and find your answers, is actually really powerful. So I think the card is just very good, period. And he was maybe a little harder to play in set 1 than he is now, but now I feel like he's almost a staple because Medusa is so good and he just dodges her, and he's a 3 lore card. Obviously, we still die to Maui, but hey, everything dies to Maui.
So what I believe you were trying to say is thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The one thing I will say, and I think that this is a problem with the deck in general, is that this is starting to look like a deck that is actually hard to get to 60 cards. This version has no McDuck's Manor. The version in the pack had 4 of them. Very different mindsets, but kind of the same thing. And I think McDuck's Manor is really good, but I also think Hades is really good. So I think right now, this deck is still in development. I don't think this is complete. I think we're still trying to figure out the best way and best routes to get the best 60 cards out of this deck. But all in all, you can see that both versions did work. It's a matter of, is there a version that has all of these things in 60 cards that we can make work completely? Time will tell, but definitely shout out to Lorcana Twins on an awesome win this past weekend. Amber Steel. Let's talk about Amber Steel for a second. Is anyone else crazy in thinking that like somehow every single first like big event or major event, Amber Steel finds a way to win? It did it in Chapter 1 at PPG GalaxyCon. It did it in Chapter 2 at PAX Unplugged. And now here in Chapter 3, into the Inklands, in a 178 player event, we're able to finally get another winner, which was Amber Steel. Let's talk about this deck. Brendan DeCandio picked up a pretty formidable win, and he did it with fashion as well, really showcasing the powerful ability of Cinderella. Cinderella has most often been known for the fact that you can shift 5 with a resist 2, 5/5, and 3 lore, just be kind of a wrecking ball to games. But this weekend, we really saw the power of the Singing Sword. In the finals of the Pack Challenge this weekend, we really did see a phenomenal amount of Cinderella challenging opposing characters, removing them before they could ever lure and do anything. And it was crazy. This is a card that in Chapter 2, I was never really crazy about. I always thought it was too expensive. I always felt it was too awkward to play. But I think now we've gotten to the point where tapping untapped characters is just so good. And being able to do it repeatable is enough to be like, man, there might really be something to this card. Almost to the point where you're like, we have to consider if Pick a Fight is worth playing. This deck as a whole is very interesting. There was a lot of hype around Pluto, but instead of playing Pluto, we still stuck with Lantern. And I think it's just because, again, the lack of item removal in the game right now, you can gain more value out of Lantern than you actually can from Pluto. While it's nice to accelerate with Pluto on turn 2 to a 3-drop, it's nicer that over the course of the game, you can consistently lower the cost of your cards through a Lantern effect, and they really are likely to sit through and last longer through your whole new worlds and really gain you incremental value over the course of the game. The song package here of Let the Storm Rage On, Strength of a Raging Fire, Along Came Zeus, Grab Your Swords, A Whole New World, and The Bare Necessities really is packing a ton of value for the game. What's crazy to me is if you really start looking at this deck list and the amount of uninkables that are here that feel like absolute staples. However, you can tell the value that DeCandio had on his own actions because A Whole New World is the only one that's a 4 of. All of the other ones come in at 3 or less. And because of that, we value that we need to play A Whole New World, and we probably need to play multiples. While the other cards are all great and they have their play their role, you don't necessarily always need to see them in multiples to win a game. Whereas it's very likely that this list is very much in the turbo wheel deck script and plan to be most successful in games. Although Amber Steel got a bunch of new tools, the deck really still kind of is the same. It's just about playing like the best possible characters, shifting really powerful cards, and playing cards for free. Songs have always been so powerful with Amber because of singers. Ariel, Cinderella are just phenomenal cards in the game that allow you to trade up in resources so very freely and even ahead of time that they should even be allowed. Having cards like Robin Hood fulfill a huge role in this, adding another possible way to wheel, earlier, and then have a 3/6 on board that just allows you to gain lore through challenging and eventually replaces itself, really does pack a true punch. This deck is awesome. What I will say, and I will remain to say this deck is difficult to play. If anyone watching the finals of that game, the only way he really wins that game 3 is exactly playing everything the way he did and putting himself in a position to even be able to win the way he did. One different decision along the way may have cost him the game. So huge shout out to Candio. He played phenomenal. He played so well, and it was really, really fun to watch as a spectator in that particular event. And I'm really excited to see what this deck can do in the hands of other people, because if other players can pick this deck up and be successful, it could be a real threat to the metagame. Now let's take a look at some of the true spice from this weekend. There were 2 Amethyst Sapphire decks that were successful and made top cuts this weekend. This list was piloted to a top 8 at Bunker Games in Minnesota by Brandon Miller. Shout out to Brandon or Fiery in the Discord if you guys know him in the TFM Discord. If you're not actually in the Discord, you can hit us up in the description below. The link is there. Come join the community and talk decks and games with us and stuff. But Brandon is a really active member of the Discord, so it's always cool to see players be successful and find a way to win games. But it's even more interesting to find them winning, and being successful in top 8s with definitely different decks that people aren't talking about. I think this is a list in Sapphire Amethyst that does not or has not had a lot of love recently and has some really interesting card selections of cards that were also haven't really been talked about. Grandma Tala, How Far I'll Go are definitely 2 cards that really have not shown up in any decks at all. So it's cool to see them and definitely see them be successful at some level. Understanding that the Queen's Castle is just phenomenal in every Amethyst deck is pretty great to note. The return of Pan's Shadow, who became one of a staple cards toward the end of the Rise of the Floodborn metagame and Ruby Amethyst decks, finds a home here. And I do think it's actually a really interesting card, but maybe we're just all in on the 2 lore evasive character that occasionally makes our foxes a little bit better. I enjoyed him in Ruby Amethyst because of the addition of Maui. As a suggestion, I would love to know what a Pocket Watch could do for this deck. If you could gain additional benefit from Pan that way. And I guess if evasive becomes more of a problem, that would be a nice little avenue to consider. Packing 4 Hades and 2 Let It Goes, along with 3 Yzma, is the spot removal we're definitely looking for to be successful. And in all honesty, this list is very, very well-rounded in curve. Having your 1s, having your 2s. Shout out to the Phils. It's been a long time since we've seen Phil hang out in a deck list. But what I really enjoy about him is that it's very likely in the support fashion. Being able to have support 3 is very interesting. I do wonder if it's worth it to go up and play Wending Darling over it just to have Ward. But as a 2-cost slot, inkable, maybe it's hard to debate, hard to argue. But because it made me, because I had to get this far into the video, there is not 5 Mickey Mouse detectives. There's only 4 Mickey Mouse detectives. The other uninkable is an Elsa, the Spirit of Winter. So there is one more addition there. No, we didn't play 5 Mickey Mouses, but hey, he did tell me if he could, he would have played 6. Sapphire Amethyst is actually a deck that we've been testing quite a bit in-house on our team. And the list is not too far off from what's going on here, but it's really about the combination and the additions to what Castle did for this deck and what cards like McDuck Manor can also do for this deck, and kind of just realizing how much draw potential you have and how many more threats that you can put in play than your opponent. I think it's really cool to see this combination really be successful, and I'm really looking forward to if it continues to be successful moving forward. Shout out again to Fiery in the Discord. Always great to see a community member be successful within the game. Sadly, although there was a lot of reported meta games in the breakdowns of top eights, there wasn't actually that many deck lists. So the last 3 decks here for Amber Sapphire, Ruby Steel, and Amber Amethyst, I don't actually have deck lists for, which is sad because I wish I could have, put them on here, talked about them, and kind of given some credence to what they're doing. We didn't get that this week. But hey, if you're watching this video and you were playing one of those decks this weekend, definitely hit me up. Let me know how successful you were with it. I think that all these decks are proving to have a bit of position in the game so far, as really we're trying to develop. I know Ruby Amethyst has come out on twice now on top so far in the meta reports. And again, it's very early on. People are still trying to figure out the best ways to play Emerald Steel, Sapphire Steel, Amber Steel, did I miss a steel? Amethyst Steel. Like, all these steel decks are kind of all up in arms of being which is the most best. And what I think is really cool is I actually think that there's almost like a bit of a rock, paper, scissors amongst the steel decks. And what's crazy is that some of them really are in bad position against Ruby Amethyst because of the play style of that, which is why we're seeing more Rise of the Titans. You're really starting to see like several layers of one up in sportsmanship in almost the way of how to combat against these decks, where before it was like, hey, I need to play a deck that answers Ruby Amethyst like heavily and then just lose to steel because it is what it is. Now it doesn't really feel that way. It feels like there's a bunch of different decks. They're all actually hedging its bets in not only building towards the matchups it expects the most, but also accepting losses where they have to be. Right now, it doesn't feel like any deck can flat out just rule every matchup, which I think is important. And I think it's a proof of growth within the metagame. Thank you guys so much for watching today. Definitely let me know in the comments how you did this weekend in tournaments. If you're looking for more stuff like this, we do it every single week. Make sure you subscribe. If you're not yet, you might want to follow me on Instagram. This week is SCG Philly. I will be there. A lot of our new team members will be there as we're going in, getting ready to conquer our first major event together. It's been a lot of fun getting to know the new players on the team, really starting to form that bond of team-like aspects, and really start conquering these first events and looking how we can do and be successful within Lorcana competitive. But definitely follow me on Instagram. I'll be kind of vlogging the whole weekend as best as possible, sharing pictures and everything there. So if you're not there, I believe it's I'll put it on screen right here because I never remember everything. But thank you guys so much for watching today. Hit that like button for me. Let me know how you feel about the metagame so far in the comments, of course, and we'll catch you next week.